Good morning, everyone. This is author R. Weir, Randy, out here in Colorado. Hopefully, everybody's having a good week. We're going to get right to it today with my guest. It's my pleasure to have her on, Sara Paretsky, all the way from Chicago. Hi, Sara. How you doing?
Hey, Randy. I think I'm as far east as you can be and still be part of West Coast, right?
That's right. Yes, you're on the other side of the Mississippi, so technically not really the West Coast crime, but definitely we're out here in Colorado uh, enjoying the weather, which has been actually pretty nice this year. Unfortunately, we actually we actually could use some rain. How are things been
Hmm.
in Chicago this year?
Oh, we have had such a cold winter. We finally warmed up last week, but it's back down to 30 and snow today.
Which is probably normal, right, for the
Oh,
windy
there's
city.
there's no such thing as normal weather anymore. I don't think anywhere.
It's
We're
always all over.
constantly baffled,
Yes, it keeps us going, and as we get older, we hate it more, right?
right?
When I was young, I loved four seasons. Now I'm like, I don't know if I would like to live somewhere where it's a little warmer some of the times, at least all year. So, but thanks for being on today. And people who don't know you, you're a pretty well known author, but there may be people out there. Tell us a little bit about yourself. That important stuff people want to know about you.
What do people want to know about me? I grew up in Kansas. My family used to spend their summer vacations in Nederland, just up the mountain from Boulder.
Oh
So
yeah.
So I do have a very tenuous 65-year-old connection to Colorado. Um, and I moved to Chicago when I was 20. I never meant it to be my permanent home. I always thought I would be in a glamour capital like Paris or London. Instead, here I am in the home of the shot and the beer, which is probably more suited to my personality. My husband used to say that I was a pit dog, that I would go down in the ring with anyone as long as they were 4 times my size. And unfortunately, that is still true. As I get older and feebler, there are more and more people who are 4 times my size, but I'm still trying to take them on. And fortunately, I have my detective, V.I. Warshawski, who is younger, smarter, fitter, more reckless, less impulse control even than I have. And she often is able to take care of really wicked people, although it gets harder all the time.
Yeah, it does. And we have a pit bull at home, and I tell you, our pit bull, she is a loving, sweet thing, but she does have a little bit of a. If she sees somebody she doesn't like, she'll let you know for sure. So I'm sure
And
that
that's how I
there's the
am
good
too.
good good part of you as well on the pit bull side, right?
Right.
So yeah, so tell us about you wrote a very trend-setting detective, a female private eye. 1982 is when it was published. So what were the struggles of trying to get the publishing world to say a female private eye is okay? Because we know how that is, the old boys network, right?
So I wanted to create a woman private eye about. I first had the desire to create her about 8 years before I actually was kind of had the courage and the support to write the book. I um, I didn't have a lot of confidence in myself as a writer. I'd grown up as I think everyone who writes grows up writing. It's just how you experience the world. But whether you think you can write for publication or outside the home, so to speak, is another story. So I wrote poetry and short stories and things like that just privately. And all the time I'm reading crime fiction, which is my first love. I did a PhD in history at the University of Chicago, and the week before my doctor's orals, instead of reading Nappin on Tudor Puritanism, which is 600 pages of Tudor Puritanism, I was in the library stacks reading whatever crime fiction the University of Chicago had, which in those days was not a lot. Anyway, second wave feminism was cresting when I was in graduate school, and it started shaping how I thought about the books I read and the world I was looking at. And I realized that the noir detective lived in a world where a woman who was sexually active was just by definition wicked. and a woman who didn't have sexual activity was, she was morally good, but mentally incompetent. And so I wanted to create a woman who was like my friends and me, doing a job that didn't exist for us necessarily when we were growing up, having a sex life that did not make us wicked, having to solve our own problems because it's very rare that Peter Wimsey comes along and solves them for you. And it just took me a very long time to get the courage to find my voice and actually make it happen. But when I did finally write what became my first book, I had great support from Stuart Kaminsky of blessed memory. Stu taught in the radio, TV, film department at Northwestern. And as I was struggling, trying to write my book while I was selling computers to insurance agents, he taught a night class in the night school called Writing Detective Fiction for Publication. And he gave me a tremendous amount of support, showed me things that I could do more skillfully, but he loved the character and loved the idea of her. And when I finished the draft, he sent it to his agent, Dominic Abel, who has been my agent ever since. So the struggle to find a publisher, that was the question you asked. And I will say I was lucky and unlucky at the same time. I was lucky in that we're talking 45 years ago, is that right? Now, and there were still many, many independent publishers, unlike today where, if Penguin says no, Random House will say no. So I was getting rejection letters from 40 different publishers. My favorite rejection letter, and I can't remember who it was from, I think Simon and Schuster, but I'm not sure. They said that a book set in Chicago had regional interest only, and that not enough people read in the upper Midwest to make it profitable to publish a book set in the Midwest. So that my rejection letters are all with my papers at the Newberry Library in Chicago, so I'd have to go down there and go through the archive to find it. But that was my all-time favorite rejection letter. It's like, yes, flyover country.
That's one I'd have framed on my wall.
Right.
It would be like right there is motivation, right? It's like,
right.
The marketing. I mean, today everything marketing, right? I mean,
Right.
There's so much research and stuff, and it probably, everything's in a computer these days and all that. But in those days, that seemed like a very narrow view of people in Chicago.
Right. Well, I do have pit bull in me. I was at a dinner party years ago when I had an editor whom I adored. She was a wonderful editor and a wonderful person, very elegant, and a big New York booster. So she gave this dinner party, and she turned to me and she said, "Isn't New York wonderful? Isn't it just the best place on earth?" And I said, "Yeah, I keep forgetting what a good city it is. I always think of it as flyover country between Chicago and Paris." And everyone in the room was like, "But New York has this, New York has this." And it's like, yes. So I am petty. I am vengeful. Don't be fooled by my smile.
Sounds like a little bit of VI's in you, right?
Or the other way around. VI is who I would be if I really was tough, smart, brave, loyal, industrious, economic. I can't remember all the other things Girl Scouts are.
So why the initials VI? Why did you decide on VI? Because it sounded like PI, or was there other reasons?
I can't answer that question because I honestly don't know. I wanted her. Chicago is a city where people are very attached to their origins, their ethnic, racial, whatever origins. And when I first came here, to stay, really, I came here originally doing volunteer work in the civil rights movement, and then moved here, what turned out to be permanently, after I graduated from the University of Kansas. But I worked as a secretary and at the University of Chicago, and hyphenated kids, Polish Americans, would come in. They would want me to to get them into closed classes or waive fines for them. And I'd say, no, I can't do that. And they'd say, you're a traitor to the Polish nation. And I'm like, I'm the secretary in this department and not even the top secretary. I am not grand enough to commit treason against an entire country. But it made me very aware of how people really cling to these identities of their parents, grandparents, the immigrants, refugees who brought them here. So I wanted VI to have an identifiable ethnic connection. And I knew Irish, which is the biggest one in Chicago, that I couldn't do that. I couldn't write meaningfully, skillfully about an African American or a Latina person. And I thought, well, one of my grandfathers came from Poland. And even though I know nothing about Poland and speak 5 words of Polish, Warsaw, that's in Chicago, in Poland. So someone named Warshawski would have Polish background. So that was how I came up with her last name. I could have called her Krakowski, actually. I could have called her almost anything. But, and then the initials just came to me, and I honestly can't say what prompted them, but they just seemed to go with Warshawski. And it took me a long time to come up with names for her. And I gave her, poor thing, I should have thought about it longer and harder. But to me, she's always VI, because the first 6 months I was writing about her, she just had the initials. She didn't have names.
Right. Yeah, I was wondering about it because I saw online she did, because sometimes, it's a single name or they never reveal what it actually stands for.
Right.
So it was a while into the series before you actually did reveal what her true first name was.
And then I gave her mother was a refugee from Mussolini's race laws. And so her mother named her Victoria for Victor Emmanuel, who unified Italy, and then Iphigenia for the only opera role she was ever able to sing professionally. Her mother was a singer.
Good backstory there on her. So the first book, which came out in 82, Indemnity Only. So give us just a little taste of what that story's about.
So at that time, I was working for CNA Insurance in Chicago. I did support work, marketing and sales, and I did a lot of support work for the claims department, creating brochures and so on for them to show to their insureds. And indemnity only is a particular insurance term for workers' comp insurance. If you get injured on the job, you get so much in a payout. But if you're killed on the job, if you're just smack dead right on the job, there's only an indemnity payout. And so it was kind of, the publisher didn't want me to put in an explanation, which I think was a good thing. Sometimes I get down in the weeds and think I have to explain everything I'm doing. But anyway, that was where the title came from. And I was so nervous. I just didn't have the confidence that I could write a book and tell a story from beginning to end. And so I did everything as simply as I could. So I used a workers' compensation fraud as my story because I knew I could get the facts from the men in the claims department that I was working with. And then, I was so pathetic in a way. I was sitting there with the woman in the window, the high window, the Raymond Chandler novel, open in my lap, and it's like, this far along, Marlowe gets beat up. So this far along, poor VI gets beat up. I was really slavishly following the conventions of the form. But even so, 9 months went by when I was struggling with this and had written about 70 pages when I discovered Stu's class and got the boost from him to really come more into my own, have my own voice, and really embrace the character. He also was the person who felt that I should have her specialize in financial crime because white-collar crime just isn't covered that much. It is more now than it was then. But And certainly I don't know a lot about street crime or the kinds of things that Elmore Leonard did so skillfully are not in my playbook.
Well, the old adage, you write what you know, right? So this was the original cover. So anyone who finds that book, that cover anywhere, it's probably worth some money these days, I would imagine. And then this is, I believe, the most recent cover, correct?
Right, yeah.
And I've noticed on the covers that VI is in the background of a lot of the covers there, at least on the new design.
Right.
Yeah. So people know it's your books, it's your character. So how many books has there been so far?
There have been 22 in the series. I've written 24 novels, 22 in the series.
And then your most recent book was Pay Dirt, right? Yeah. There you go. Yeah. And you got a good copy there. You got a big copy. Yeah. And so how has your character evolved over all these 22 books? I mean, obviously people, we don't stay static. We evolve. How has VI changed over that 22 books and so many years?
You know, I'm not sure she's changed for the better. She's started reflecting me too much, I think. So I'm taking a break from her right now. The book that I'm working on now is not in the series. And I've done that twice before when I felt that I was getting stale with her and needed a break from her. But the times have changed radically, and so she's changed, maybe not radically, but I want to say that when I first started writing, and really up in probably the first 10 years that I was writing about her, she has a good friend who was a reporter on a Chicago newspaper, Murray Ryerson. And if VI could not persuade the state's attorney that there was a case or get the police to arrest the baddies, Murray could do an expose and at least shame them into shuffling off and stopping their baddiness, their wickedness. But as newspapers got taken over by big media conglomerates and who did not want to annoy the billionaires in the world, and who they also learned that every time they cut their investigative reporter staff in half, their stock price doubled. Investigative journalism hardly exists anymore except in fringe publications like ProPublica. So how a detective can bring someone to justice who has all the money in the world and power and connections and is doing truly wicked things, that becomes an ever-increasing struggle for me. And in Pay Dirt, where the story actually hinges on some billionaires trying to really working kind of as, I don't want to say too much about it because it'll, spoiler alert, but it took me a long time to finish the book because it took me a long time to come up with what felt to me like a believable way for justice to prevail. And I'm having a similar struggle with the book that I'm writing now. Even though it was meant to be a break from VI, it's still somewhat a VI kind of a book. And I thought, the hallmark of my fiction is if there's a billionaire, you know you are looking at a truly despicable person. And so there's no surprise. The surprise is, how is my lone person going to bring that billionaire to justice? So I'm struggling with that now. I've written 85,000 words on the new book, and I'm thinking, this puppy has to come to an end sometime soon, and I'm still in the middle.
We know how that is. So this is a new book with new characters, no connection at all to anything you've written before?
That's correct, yeah.
So that's always a challenge when you're starting fresh.
Right.
New
And
characters.
also it's third person, which is a challenge.
Yes.
So,
Because
and my
most of you,
heroine is my age.
oh,
So it's like, just, let's just see what an old woman on her own with the CIA chasing her can do.
well, we'll find out, right? When you get to
Right.
the end, right?
Yes, I'm very grateful to Macmillan, to St. Martin's Press, for being willing to take a chance on this, because it is a risk and it is a departure.
Well, and it's still in the same genre. It's just different
Right.
characters and all that.
Mhm.
So that's good. And I mean, as a writer, we always want to stretch. I have 3 different series myself. I just started a new series
Oh, wow.
that I just released, and I know at first there was that, okay, this is going to be similar, but I want it to be different. So finding that from the others, because you want to be different. You know, I had a private eye
Sure.
series, and I had a former U.S. Marshal. This is a retired police officer. It's still
Hmm.
crime, but I still wanted the tone to be somewhat different. And I know when I first started, I had concerns, and I had some of my alpha readers read it a little bit and give me some
Mm-hmm.
feedback. And
Oh, that was smart.
fortunately, it was fairly positive, and I just kept on going. It sounds to me like you're similar to me, that you're more of a pantser when it comes to writing. Is that correct?
You know, I don't know why I find that word makes me squeamish. It makes me think of Captain Underpants, a combination of Captain Underpants and a German tank division. Um, yes, I'm a.
Yeah, it's not a tank, but yeah. Yeah, but we
Um,
fly by the seat of our pants, sort of. We're not strict outliners.
You know, I think I write in the way that Tony Hillerman used to describe. He would say that he wrote to the end of what the headlights could pick up on the road, and then he'd have to stop and see where the road went on from there. And I think that's a really good description of my own process. Unfortunately, my own process also involves realizing that I took the wrong road. And so the book that I'm working on now, I'm on the 6th draft, which I hope will be the last draft. With Pater, it actually went to 9 drafts before I had a storyline that I was really happy with. So, yeah, my motto is faster, smarter, harder, faster, smarter, harder, so that I can write like you and have many series and keep them all going instead of writing a book every 18 to 24 months. So, but the book that I'm working on now, um, it started as a sort of a caper idea. An old woman, a retired CIA agent on the run from the CIA, and it was meant to be kind of like a Carl Hiaasen novel. And then I realized I don't caper, and so I had to regroup and start thinking it through as with a more straightforward and serious storyline. The fun part for me for the book that I'm writing is that I've created an imaginary country, because I knew that if I had my CIA agent working in a real country, it would take me 10 years to learn enough about the country to write about it believably, and then I'd get 100,000 letters from people who would say, yeah, but the Democratic Republic of Congo or wherever. So I've created an imaginary country. I've carved it out of the Central Asian republics. It's called Hayalistan, which is Turkish for imaginary country. And the most fun that I have with this particular book is that I've been translating their great epic poem from the Hayalistan language, Hayali, into English. Um, and so I've been having a lot of fun with that. And I was thinking, I can see why Tolkien took forever to publish his Ring trilogy, because once you're in this imaginary country and your imaginary language and their great epic and the clan structure, you're just so enthralled with what you're creating that you forget that you're supposed to be writing a story with a plot, a beginning, a middle, and hopefully an end.
Yes, it would be a challenge. I've always been impressed with, science fiction writers or fantasy writers, creating whole new worlds and new races and languages and everything else. And I'm like, I don't have that type of skill. It's not. All my stuff is written really in the real world, from real world people and experiences and stuff like that. But to
Well, I
come up
will
with that.
bring I've translated about 100 lines from the great epic poem of Hayali, and at the banquet at Left Coast Crime, I will recite those lines. So if you have any desire to learn Hayali epic poetry, come to the banquet at Left Coast Crimes.
I'll be there. Eating whatever they serve us for dinner that night. But yes, I'll be interesting to listen, hearing how that sounds. Have you been rehearsing?
No, this just popped into my head just this second.
Work through it. So you mentioned Philip Marlowe. What other influences have you had through the years? What other authors have you enjoyed reading? Obviously, Private Eye, but I'm sure there were things outside of those genres that you'd like to read as well.
Well, I'm a very eclectic reader, but mostly fiction. I don't read a lot of nonfiction unless I'm actually trying to do research. I'm just not a big fan of reality.
Scary enough, right?
Yeah, especially these days. And I don't have a good escape place from reality these days. Ooh, snow just pelted into my window. Um, But I would say that the books that I've read over the last couple of decades that have impressed me the most are quite varied. I loved Wolf Hall. I just thought that was about the most perfect book I ever read, and I was really envious. Um, and now, why can't I think of who wrote Wolf Hall? She's so famous, and she died not that long ago. Anyway, the other thing that I'm terribly jealous of is Mark Rylance is one of my most, Hilary Mantel, of course. So she got Mark Rylance to play Cromwell in the BBC production of her novel. And I adore Mark Rylance. If he's in New York, I fly out to see him perform whatever he's performing. And I thought, God, you wrote a perfect novel and you got Mark Rylance. That just seems like
Pretty good.
greedy, Hillary.
So VI was made into a movie
Yeah,
with
many
Kathleen
years.
Turner all those years ago.
Yep.
What were your thoughts on the movie when it came
Um,
out?
my thought was that it was an amazing coincidence that Disney and I both had created a private eye named V.I. Warshawski.
So not the same character as what you had imagined in the books.
No, not the same character. A lot of not the same things. I think there were a couple of things that I liked about it. I felt that I mean, Kathleen was really committed to making a movie about the character, and I was grateful for that. But at the same time, there were scenes that made me just, they were annoying, like especially the opening where she's in a bar and, VI has these red pumps that figure a lot in the early books. I sort of have forgotten about them recently. But there's this whole scene in the bar with these spiky red high heels that are just a vehicle for showing off Kathleen's legs, basically. Um, and there, but the other thing, Vi is very close to her downstairs neighbor, Mr. Contreras. And in the movie, they turned him into a really disgusting stereotype of a Mexican immigrant. And it's still, especially in these days, with the stereotyping of Mexicans and Mexican immigrants. I mean, it would always be offensive, but right now it's just to think about it is really, really painful.
So with all the success on these short series, Lee Child, Reacher series, Bosch has been very popular. Is there any discussion in that type of format because I would think that would be very successful if they could get the character right?
Yes, I mean, we're certainly working on it. Disney owns the rights, and I've worked hard but fruitlessly to try to get them back. So we're working on. I think they're open to. Well, who knows what will happen now? Everything is in flux right now,
Sure.
but um, but it's still possible, and I would certainly welcome it.
Yeah, because the Bosch series, he's going to have a Renee Ballard series now too, with a female cold case detective that works in L.A. But I would think that would this character, if it's done right, and that's the biggest thing, is doing it correctly. Because I think they really nailed Bosch. Titus Wellever does a great job, and then the Mickey Rourke series I think is done well too. So if they really can nail the character correctly, I think it could be very successful. Finding the right actress as well would be a challenge. Have you ever had any envisions of who would play that character? Any of the existing actresses out there?
Well, I should have been prepared for this question. I have a list that my beloved friend, sadly now dead, Pamela Beer Briggs, who made the documentary about me, Marcia Muller, and Sue Grafton. She and I spent an afternoon watching episodes from a lot of different shows and put together a list of the actors that we thought would be good. We wanted someone who was about 40, not too young, but
Right.
still young enough to be really physically able to do the that VI can do. But I didn't bring that list with me, and it's
No,
not
that's
in the
okay.
top of my head. But I have a list.
That's good. So just get your agents, start calling them, right?
Right.
Sometimes they have more power in Hollywood to get things done too. I want to see
Absolutely.
something with this character. So yeah.
Yes, I'm very lucky that I'm represented in Hollywood by creative artists. So if anyone can make something happen, they will for sure.
So what about some other books? So I noticed you've written some nonfiction stuff, and I know I was really fascinated seeing this one here on your site. And seems very prevalent to what's going on in the world these days from what I read about it and stuff. But any of your other books beyond VI, you talked about the one. What are some of the others that you've had some nonfiction, and I know you've had some short stories.
Right. I've written, I think, about 30 short stories maybe, and I self-published um, three of them in a little book that I'm going to bring as a Lucinda Serber, who's running or my part anyway, of West Coast Crimes, said that the host of the table should have a party favor for people at her table. So I'm going to bring these self-published short stories. They appear in other anthologies, but it's just a nice place to have three of them all together.
And there's some of them, and then you do a prequel as well for VI when she was a youngster.
Oh, that's one of my short stories,
Yeah.
which Morrow published as a sort of a standalone called Wildcat. But it's just a short story, not a novel, not even
Yeah.
really. But it's yeah, VI is 11. The summer that brought me to Chicago, the summer of the terrible race riots in which angry white people were burning down the city over the idea of integration. Um, and VI's father is a Chicago cop, and he was assigned to Marquette Park where the riots were taking place, the worst of the riots were taking place. And she thinks he's being targeted for murder, and she's terrified. So she exercises all of her little VI nascent skills, and also her lack of impulse control, and her I based some of what she and her beloved cousin Boom Boom do. When I worked for the insurance company, one of my outside clients was the marketing manager for a big architecture magazine, and he was telling me, we're talking years ago, so his memories were from the Great Depression of the 1930s. he was a huge Cubs fan, and in order to get to the games, he would shinny up. His family had no money. He was maybe 12, 13 years old. He would shinny up the girders of the Chicago L so that he could get on a train without having to pay the fare, ride to Wrigley Field, and then clamber up the back of the bleachers. And nowadays you couldn't do that because the bleachers were the cheap seats, and it was now there's a certain cachet to them, and they have guards and so on. But in those days you could do that. So I have Vi and her cousin Boom Boom. They're in the 1960s, but they don't have any money, so they're shinnying up the girders of the. Um, Actually, he told me a sweet story. The last time the Cubs were in the World Series before 2016, when they were playing the Yankees, he then was 21. He had a job, and this would have been probably around, I think 1935 was when that series was played. Anyway, so he paid his full fare to get on the L, and he rode to Wrigley Field. And in those days, people dressed up to go to the ballpark. Men wore suits, women wore nice dresses. So there he is in his three-piece suit, so proud of the fact that he has a job and that he can pay for his ticket. And he gets to the ticket counter, and of course, the game is sold out. He can't get in. So he went around to the back in his three-piece suit and shinnied up the brickwork and watched it from the bleachers.
Yeah, that's well, Wrigley's not a what 30 some thousand seats, so it's fairly small. So it probably
Yeah,
doesn't take much to sell out. So
right.
yeah. So I was reading on your website that you were involved in the establishment of Sisters in Crime, a great book organization, a lot of female authors. What was the motivation behind founding that organization?
You know, when I published my first book, Sue Grafton and I published our first books the same year, 1982. And we both, sales were modest, but we both had great review attention. And so I was just really ignorant about the marketing side of the book world. I was a reader, not involved in any of those things. In March of 1986, Hunter College hosted what was the first national conference on women in crime fiction. And even though I was a relative newcomer, a real newcomer, um, they invited me to be a participant and speak on some of the panels. And so as I was there at that conference, I started hearing from women who had not been treated as well as Sue and I had been, who were their books were ignored, they never got any review attention. And this really matters because libraries, at that time, libraries were the biggest buyers of midlist books. I'm not sure that's still true today. But libraries make their buy decisions on national media, 2 or 3 reviews in juried publications. So if you're not getting reviewed, the biggest buyer in the country is not seeing that you've written anything. And bookstores, similarly, that's how they're also learning. And in those days, in those halcyon, dear dead days of yesteryear, independent bookstores were how books got sold. So I started hearing a lot about this, and then I started hearing about women would go to conferences, and one woman said, the moderator of the panel she was on said, "So what do you do when your kitty cat jumps on your keyboard and interrupts your writing?" Or I went to a conference where at the lunch, my dinner partner, the man on my right hand, said, was I a writer? And I said I was. And he said, well, and I was married. He wanted to know that. And he said, it was nice that I had this little hobby so that I didn't bother my husband when he came home from a hard day's work. So there was just that pervasive attitude, and in a lot of different ways. So in October of 86, I'd heard so much over the summer from the women that I met at the conference and then friends of theirs, that at the BoucherCon, which was in Baltimore in 86, I hosted, with the help of my Ballantine editor, Marianne Eccles, hosted a breakfast to see if there was interest in organizing. Because in the words of the great Flo Kennedy, don't agonize, organize. Words to live by today more than ever. Anyway, the people that I invited were very enthusiastic about starting an organization to do this. And so Sisters, that was the beginning of Sisters in Crime. We met again in New York in May during the Edgar Week, and by that time we had 100 people interested, and so we came up with our name, Sisters in Crime, and started with officers and all that sort of stuff. But the first big project that we ran was on book reviews. We wanted to know if it was true that women's books were not reviewed in the same degree that men's books were. And Jim Wang, who at that time was the editor of the Drood Review, great supporter of what we were trying to do. He gave us a list of 1,000 crime novels that had been thrillers, crime, the whole spectrum of the genre, that had been published in 1986. And so in 1987, when we were really getting going, we just all took our part and picked something like 200 publications that we looked at to check reviews versus this list. And what we found was that, adjusted for publication rates, that a book by a man was 7 times more likely to be reviewed than a book by a woman. And this meant, women's careers were dead ending because no one knew what they were writing or saying. They could get 1 book published, but they couldn't get 2 books published. So Sisters, from the beginning, was really an advocacy organization, and it continues to be. I'm not active in it and haven't been for a long time, but the current generation, we have about 5,000 members internationally now, and the current generation of leadership is so committed to diverse voices and supporting writers across the board. We certainly have male members and trans members and LGBTQ members. Also, the Crime Writers of Color organization, that's a couple of years old now, because much as our hearts were in the right place, I'm not sure our actions were in the right place to give writers of color the support they needed. But we're very also enthusiastic about crime writers of color, and we're grateful for the members of that organization who also want to be part of Sisters.
So did you ever imagine it would be as big as it was when you first started? I mean, it really is. There's chapters all over the country, and there'll be a chapter that's going to be at the event next week.
And Sisters is one of the sponsors, which is great. My father's parents met walking a picket line for the International Garment Workers Union. So I think I just had it in my head that that's what happens when you are organized.
Absolutely.
We certainly had some interesting fights in our early days. God, I used to get attacked in print all the time. People said I was advocating censorship, that I hated men. The Chicago Tribune wrote a story about me in which they said that I dressed all in black and I had eyes that slashed and burned and a thin, long, pointed nose. It's like, here's my nose. I don't know, is it thin, long, and pointed? I felt like a character stepping out of the protocols of the learned elders of Zion.
Well, I think it's the usual, right? You attack something, and a lot of times you're attacking. That's the way you act, right? It's the way it is in the politics of this world, and we won't get into, what's going on right now. But that's kind of a key thing for major politicians, right? They attack after and say, "This is what's going on," and you're taking away my free speech when they're actually doing the same thing themselves. So.
But I was lucky. Everything in my career has been lucky about my age, my timing. because I was lucky that the internet didn't exist when we started Sisters, because then I could have really been pilloried. But when it was just in the fanzines,
Right.
um, you know, it's like,
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, there's no filter on the internet these days. I
right.
mean,
So
it's crazy sometimes, and yeah, it's can be very frustrating. So I always ask this, and I know we've got about 15 minutes here because you have another appointment, but I always ask this. And the title of the show is "Bringing Life to Characters." So, what is it you look when you're creating those characters, those unique characters, especially your new book? You had to come up with some new characters. What do you look for when you're trying to get those characters to pop off the page?
they need to have a believable voice. And until that happens, they're pretty much stick figures who are not very interesting. So physical appearance is not that important to me. It comes along as it has to. But the way the character talks is a reflection of how they think. And so that's been, especially writing in the third person and creating Lily, my ex-CIA agent now on the run. Um, that it's not like writing VI in the first person where you get introspection. You get some of her interior voice, but it's more what she says out loud that you have to go on. And she's very resourceful. She came up with the CIA. There's a I'm not this is actually not a book about the CIA. It's sort of about the CIA, but it's not meant to be a realistic look at the CIA. It's a look at a big organization and people's desire to move up the ranks and have power and who's close to the sources of power. And it's a kind of thing that I saw experienced for the decade that I worked for this big multinational insurance company. The To me, this book is about a big bureaucracy that has a lot of government power behind it, but it's still got people who want power and are trying to jockeying for room. And the CIA back probably it hasn't changed that much, but it was a long time before women could be field agents, before women could take a proper role in the agency. So my character Lily, who's close to my own age, which is 77, her immediate boss he did not want women in his station, so it gave her uh, she became a maverick who actually probably wouldn't have survived in the real CIA organization, but in order to get intel and get her job done, she developed really kind of secretive improvisations to skirt around her boss's hostility to just having her at his station. So thinking through the situation that she worked and lived in, and then her backstory that came very slowly. Um, yeah, all those things have to come together to make a believable character. And I don't think fast. I write fast when I know what I'm writing, but it takes me a long time to know what I'm writing.
So, are the characters sitting there with you when you're writing? Do you feel like they're kind of looking over your shoulder?
No,
Uh,
they're not. They're in my head,
Yeah.
and I'm bringing them to life through my fingers.
So, what advice do you give aspiring authors? You mentioned earlier about trying to build that confidence, and you were not confident in yourself, and you had a mentor that kind of help guide you. Do you feel that's an important aspect for those who maybe are not
I
feeling that
think for
confident?
many people, sure, there are plenty of people who just know that they know what they're doing and don't need that voice and that help. But Sisters in Crime, they offer a lot of support to beginning writers, and it's a great place to go. Mystery Writers of America, your local chapter, will also help. But the big thing about sisters is there are so many local chapters. MWA the chapters tend to have to cover a large geographical area, and so it's harder to get that kind of immediate support. They offer, I mean, they do as best a job as they can at the chapter level with mentoring. But I would urge any writer who wants to explore mentoring and techniques and so on to join their local sisters chapter, because you'll get a lot of help there.
So you're coming to Denver next
I
week
am.
for the Left Coast Crime, and you're one of the. I've got the right here, but you're one of the guests of honors. I had Manuel Ramos. I interviewed him last week. He was great.
I think he's such an impressive person as well as writer. I'm really looking forward to meeting him.
Yes, it was great talking with Manuel and talking about some of his books and stuff. And he's another one who I think his characters would make great TV fare if someone can get the right character, right person to play the character and do it the right way, the way he wrote it. I told him, I said, that'd be a show I'd watch in a heartbeat, especially if it's based here in Colorado.
Right,
even better.
Absolutely.
Even better for us. So you've got a busy schedule, I'm sure. They're probably running you all over the place.
I know, and I'm very honored to be a guest of honor, of course, but it means that I can't just sneak around and do some of the things that I might want to do on my own. Like, because I just won't have time to revisit Nederland, which I would really like to do. But I have to get back to Chicago, so I'll fly home on Sunday.
Well, if people are calling and looking for you and stuff, and I hear them go, "Where's Sara? We can't find Sara," and I'll say, I think I know where she might have gone. She might have snuck out. Send a car. You could send a car out there. She might be there. I have
no sense of direction. I could so easily just be wandering around the mountains until I ran out of gas.
Well, in these hotels, and I read the email yesterday they sent. It was like 3 floors. And I know we were at Bouchercon last year and it was at the Gaylord there in Nashville. And oh my gosh, we were so exhausted from walking because it was all over the place, and that was such a huge area. So hopefully this will be a little more compact, but being on 3 different floors doesn't sound like there'll be a lot of people rushing to elevators, I'm sure, in between.
Right. Well, find the staircase.
That's right. Yeah, that's what I ended up doing there. I definitely got a lot of steps. I probably lost some weight at that event. So, all right. Well, we're about 10:53. So I've got your website here. There's a lot of great information on your website. All your books are there. There's some links to some articles you've written, and some of them are very interesting. I enjoyed reading a lot of what you had out there, and I like your little social. You definitely get a little bit political with some of your stuff, and I think we're both on the same side of that political fence when it comes to those things. So I definitely enjoyed reading what you had to say about all that.
Thank you.
And hopefully maybe I'll get a chance to talk to you. You're going to be so busy. So
well, I'll look for you, Randy. So thanks a lot for your interest.
And I'm sure you're going to be on some panels.
Yep. Yeah, Lucinda sent me my schedule yesterday, and I thought, oops, can't look at this right now.
Yeah, it's too much. So are you coming in on Wednesday then?
Yeah, I am. And I got the last time I was in Denver, I haven't been there for many, many years. I was doing an event at the Tattered Cover, and man, I had altitude sickness. So I have drugs now that I'm going to take I hope they will protect me so that I can just leap right into action.
Drink a lot of water.
Yep.
And all that, and pace yourself. Don't get going too bad. Because yes, and if you start feeling a little lightheaded, be sure you sit down, because yes, I've lived here now since '81, so I'm pretty used to it. But even me, if I'm going too fast, sometimes it can catch up if you're not paying attention to it. But
well, I am hard to embarrass, so if I feel faint, I will just lie on the floor and stick my feet in the air.
And someone will hand a book to you, right? Could you sign this while you're down here? Yeah. All that. So, well, great, Sarah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being on. I enjoyed talking with you.
Thanks a lot, Randy. I
You
appreciate
all
your
have
interest.
yeah, and you all have a great trip out here, and I look forward to listening to someone else interview. I'll be leaning over. I asked her that question. I know her answer.
And she answered it differently.
That's right. You might. Yes.
Thanks so much. I so appreciate your interest. And I
Appreciate
look
you
forward
too.
to seeing you next week.
Yeah. Great. Bye-bye.
Okay. Ciao, ciao.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for being on. Enjoyed talking with Sarah today. Since we're a little bit on time crunch, I didn't talk about, but I had a new book come out this week, Justice for the Forgotten. Been getting great reviews on it. I hope you'll check it out. It's only 99 cents until the 9th, so you can get the ebook really inexpensively. And there's my logo, the Steel Wheels Coal Mystery. It's book 1 in a new series, and so far the reactions have been great to it. So hope you get a chance to check it out. Next week I'll have Lori Herbst, which is going to be on Tuesday at 6 p.m. She is also coming to Left Coast Crime. And a couple of weeks after that, I will have Ann Parker, who's also coming to Left Coast Crime. So. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. We will be talking with you next week. Goodbye.